Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Chan, and I am the acting director of the University of Victoria's Center for Studies in Religion and Society for the 2022-23 academic year. Welcome to our Thursday public lecture, whether you are in person or online. I'd like to open this lecture by acknowledging and respecting the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory we hold this lecture at the University of Victoria, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples who have continuing historical relationship with these lands. Very pleased today to introduce one of the members of our amazing graduate student cohort this year. Tanya Brittain is a MA student in the Pacific and Asian Studies Department here at UVic. It's been very interesting so far already this year to hear about Tanya's fieldwork and research in Asia. And I look forward very much to her talk on the Meiji government's separation of Buddhist and Shinto institutions and the ongoing use of talismans in Japan. So welcome, Tanya.
So good evening. Thanks for coming. So my thesis, Tracing Talisman, Power, Politics, and Religion in Modern Japan, is a research project that uses talismans to trace continuity in religious practices over space and time. In my research, I approached them from the contemporary period and look back to the Meiji Restoration, which was 1868 to 1912. So this point in Japanese history is significant for many reasons, but most closely tied to my own research is the government's suppression of Buddhism and the forced separation of Buddhism and Shinto, shinbutsu bunri. It was during this time that the government began to promote what we now recognize as state Shinto, and they became very nationalistic in their endeavors. So before the separation, Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines were located within complexes. But during the restoration, many of them were stripped of any Buddhist trappings. And at first glance, the movement seems really successful, and it was in some cases at the institutional level, but I argue that it failed in practice and that the world of talismans has remained remarkably consistent in both Buddhism and Shinto. So what are talismans? Is it this one, Noriko? Thank you. So often, through a Western lens, when we think of talisman, charm, amulet, we often think of something superstitious or nonsensical, but when we're looking at Japan, they actually become a really interesting way of assessing continuity over space and time because they're such an integral component of Japanese religiosity. So the definition of talisman that I'm working with in my research comes from this book, Nihon no Gofu Bunka. It's a really fruitful secondary source for me. So here, Japanese scholarship is going over different types of talismans, different categories, and the blanket term in Japanese is gofu, and these scholars translate that as talisman or amulet. Talismans are material objects. They're perceived as potent implements, efficacious in warding off danger, securing childbirth, attending to medical ailments, so much more. They're used for success in exams, finding love, even traffic safety. They can act as a conduit for manifestation of deities. They can protect from evil and bad luck. There are many kinds of talismans, and they are utilized in various ways. And most importantly, they're found at every single temple and shrine across Japan. So I'm going to go through a few different types. So ofura, these are paper slips. They're often hung or placed on altars. So a Buddhist altar is a butsudan, or a Shinto altar, a kamidana. Omamori, so these are protective talismans. This one here is one that I got last summer, and it is for good health. Omamori are meant to be carried with you, and they can serve many functions. So health, success in exams, all those same things. Emma are wooden tablets that, so you buy one, and then on the other side of it, you write a personal inscription. So you can write a wish, a prayer, anything that you want to communicate to the kami. Ian Reader has referred to them as letters to the gods. And so this one here on the screen, on the right side of my screen, these are emma to the goddess Benzaiten. And you can see in the other photos where they're hung up. So they stay at the temple or shrine, and they are burned ritually at the end of each year. Omikuji. So these are really fun. They're fortune slips. They come in different forms, I guess, but this one here, so this stick on the right side, it was in a shaker. So you pay your 100 yen, which is about $1, and you shake the shaker and you pull the stick out, and whatever number is on that stick, you find the correlating box or drawer, I guess, and you choose your fortune. And if it's a good fortune, then you can take it away with you. And if it's a bad fortune, you tie it up and you leave it for the kami to deal with for you. And those also are destroyed. And these are goshuin. These really caught my attention when I was there this summer. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you mostly about this evening. So to get started, just to get you situated, there's a couple maps. So on the left, obviously, we have a map of Japan. So we're Southeast Asia. And then on the right, it's showing you the area where my research is focused. So I'm focusing on the Kansai region, which is central Japan, mainly Kyoto, and a very specific network of temples and shrines in that area. So on this map, because I'm not able to study all of the tens of thousands of existing temples and shrines, I have stayed within this well-connected network because there's just too much data to go over. I've outlined the boundaries of this network. So in the north, we have Kurama-dera, which is a Buddhist temple. To the east, we have Mii-dera, which is also a Buddhist temple. To the west is Matsuo, which is a Shinto shrine. And to the south, Iwashimizu Hachimangu, which is also a Shinto shrine. Some other important sites associated with this network include Daigoji, Toji, and Toyokuni. And here, the most powerful talismanic deities in all of Japan are enshrined. So this is an example of continuity, relevance, and prominence of talismans in Japan. They can be seen at shrines such as this one, the Dendengu, which is a shrine dedicated to the kami of electricity. And here, this is important because we can see that the temple and the shrine are all within the same complex, which is something that hits the core of my thesis, coming back to the separation during the Meiji period. So, they implemented shinbutsu bunri, which was meant to tear all of these associations apart. And no doubt they succeeded in some places, but I argue that it wasn't as successful as one might think, especially when it comes to talismanic practices. So like I said, when I was in Japan last summer, I was introduced to goshuin. One of my language teachers brought her whole collection to the school. And at first I just thought like, wow, these are really cool and fun. And so the next day I went to a shrine and I bought my own book and I started collecting them, not realizing that it was going to actually direct a lot of my research. So at first I just thought it was something really fun, but actually they're quite fascinating. And as you can see in the slide, they're a type of seal, and they're often placed directly in a special book that you purchase, usually at a shrine or temple, but a lot of little local shops sell them as well. So they're a personal talisman, and they connect the bearer through the act of sealing to the religious site they are received from. Again, they're a form of protective sealing. And as you can see here, there are 2 goshuin that I collected from Daigoji. And just pay attention to the iconography, the stamps, and the calligraphy. So these seals are available at temples and shrines throughout Japan, and they serve to commemorate the visit for tourists and believers alike. So it's very interesting that little attention has been given to the practice of giving and receiving goshuin in the modern period. In fact, no European language scholarship has addressed the world of goshuin or even talismans for that matter. And very little Japanese scholarship has addressed it also. So these are really interesting and an important talisman that function quite differently from omamori, ofura, or ema in several fundamental ways, which I will discuss later. Okay, so this on the left is a goshuin that I collected myself this summer, and on the right is a goshuin from 1928. So when I got home from Japan and I was on this goshuin kick, I ended up finding a book on an online auction for sale. So I ordered it, not really knowing what I was going to get in the mail, but it turned out to be really helpful. And interesting that many of the shrines and temples that I had visited, the person who owned this goshuin booklet from 1920s had visited the same ones. So here we can see, the medium is a bit different. So in mine, when I purchased it, they gave me an individual sheet that I had to put in the book myself. And on the right, they wrote it in the book directly, but there's still tremendous continuity in the colors, the layout, and I think it's just really cool that we're at the exact same shrine getting the same goshuin. And same here. So on the left picture, the right side of it is a goshuin that I collected from the Toyokuni in Kyoto. And on the right, it's not the same area. This one was received in Osaka, but it was also a Toyokuni shrine. Okay, so this one on the left, again, so these were both collected at the exact same shrine. over a period of about 100 years. Honnoji in Kyoto is a really cool temple in one of the famous shopping districts, and it's where Oda Nobunaga committed ritual suicide. And if you don't know much about him, he was a famous samurai, and he has a lot of really cool history. So it's a very popular place to go. Okay. So some of you may already know that there are a lot of different kinds of Buddhism across Japan. So the seal on the left comes from a sub-temple of one of the most famous Zen temples in Japan, Kenninji. The one on the right is from Kuramadera, a Tendai temple. Again, note the iconography, colors, placement, and calligraphy. And I find it interesting that, there's tremendous similarity even across boundaries, sectarian boundaries. So an interesting fact about the one on the left is that it is a commemorative goshuin to a major Shinshu teacher. But Shinshu Buddhism is notoriously known to not like icons. So it's really interesting that, as much as they don't like them, and we still have a goshuin dedicated to him. On the right is a goshuin from Todaiji in Nara, from the Nigatsudo. And I don't know, I think it was interesting for me because the first time I was in Japan in 2019, I went to Nara, to Todaiji, and I took a picture of the Nigatsu, part of the Nigatsudo that has been my screensaver ever since. And I didn't realize that there was anything really significant or important about it. It was just something that I felt really connected to for some reason. And so when I saw the goshuin from 1928, it just was really cool and highlighted the fun of my research. And here on the left, we have two stamps to two deities, both obtained from the same temple, Miidera, and one on the right from my book from the Showa period. Notice again the similarities across both time and space. There's tremendous consistency in the ways in which goshuin are collected and produced. Goshuin are collected by temple and shrine goers, and unlike any other types of talisman, which lose their efficacy over time and must be destroyed or replaced, goshuin function as somewhat of a mini pilgrimage. They don't expire. They're not worn, they're not hung up, they're not generally carried around unless you're going around collecting goshuin. Collecting these is a way of accruing merit or good karma, while simultaneously connecting yourself to a particular deity and the power associated with them. They are an important and interesting form of material culture and provide a window through which we can study how people actually do religion. Oftentimes, when people hear the word religion today, they assume it is something antiquated or irrelevant, or that it is something people practice with reverence or in private. But in Japan, it doesn't really apply the same way, even though, you can always practice your religion in private. It's more of a public display. So this picture is really fun, and I'm going to conclude with it. It is a perfect example of old and new. It's nail polish. It's talismanic nail polish that is sold at Miidera, one of the oldest temples in Japan. It is only sold at Miidera, and it's talismanic in how it's made. So they use, during a fire ritual, the goma, they burn sesame seed and wooden planks with Sanskrit written on them. And when they're done with this, they take the ash and they put it into the nail polish. And it's a local business that makes the nail polish specifically for Miidera. And that's thanks.
Thank you, Tanya, for those that presentation and for the such beautiful pictures and also really helpful maps that you provided us. We have a little bit of time, so we can take some questions, but I was wondering if I could start by asking you to, and I know you could, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work learning the Japanese language, and then tell us a little bit about even the kinds of things that the Goshuin say. So you said they were commemorative, but if we go back a couple slides and like look at some of the text, I'm not asking you to give us exact translations, but can you give us a sense of what they say, and then maybe also a little bit about your journey trying to, learn the language and some of the challenges in that.
Okay. Yeah, so learning the language is an ongoing thing. And I can't just free read these, like I need to sit down and work with them. And a lot of them, because of the calligraphy, are really difficult to decipher.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And so what kinds of things, can you tell us a little bit about, like, so you said it's commemorative. So I assume that some of these, do they record, because I don't know the first thing about the language, are they recording where the person is and a date, or do they have actual sayings, or what kinds of things?
Oh, for sure. So they record the date and the name of the temple, and often the deity as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And do they contain also kind of sayings, or is it really just kind of a record?
It's just a record.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the talismanic value of them is kind of just that you've been in that place. It's like a material.
Yeah, and it's the act of sealing. So it's really cool watching them actually. Like some of them, like I said, was just a sticker, like this one here was purchased, and they told me that it was too powerful to go with the other ones. So I had to keep it separate. But when you're watching them do it, they take their time and they stamp each one very carefully, and they write it out. And it can be Buddhist monks or shrine maidens or just employees of the temple or shrine. So it's all in the act of doing it.
And I have another question, and then I'll get to Jessica and Paige over there, but also, and this is just my own lack of knowledge, but you talked a little bit about talismanic deities. And so are those kind of deities that pre-exist talismans, but the talismans like quite often get made about, or is there something about the deities that what is it about the deity that makes it talismanic? If you think so?
Good question. I think that like all the deities have the ability to become talismanic. It's just what I meant is some deities are far more powerful and potent than others. So within that network, the deities enshrined there are extremely powerful. So the talismans that, what is what I'm looking for, embody them, I suppose.
Yeah.
Does that answer?
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
think it does. It does. There are certain deities that are, that they get made the objects of talismans because they're particularly powerful or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, I know we had a question maybe from Jessica. We can start there.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks for this presentation. I'm just curious visually, well, maybe not visually. I'm curious about the black calligraphy on the red seal and why you need both. What does it mean? I imagine that these wouldn't be effective if you had just the red seal or just the black calligraphy.
That's a really great question, and it is one of my research questions. So I don't have an answer for you right now, but yeah. Thanks.
Hello, thanks for this. Super interesting. I'm wondering if the talismans, the deities are ever geared towards a particular audience or a particular issue. So this deity or this talisman, if you're trying to have a baby, or this one, if you're fighting off illness, or this one, if you're a woman or a man or a child or an elderly person.
Absolutely. When we're looking at omamori, especially, that's, yeah, and the ema, because you can write your own request.
Thanks, Tanya. I was wondering, like part of your thesis relates to the sort of seeming failure on one level of power politics to kind of enshrine, so to speak, a particular religion. Evidence being like the continued use of talismans. Is this something that's like a cultural phenomenon that spans different religions or no religion? Or is it only adherents, like in a Buddhist tradition or something who will migrate towards this, and it's just sort of persisted despite persecution?
No, if I'm understanding the question correctly. It's not strictly a Buddhist thing. It is Buddhist, Shinto. There are other traditions as well that I don't go into my research, like Onmyodo. But yeah, it's not specifically Buddhist.
So when you, or I should say when you go back to Japan, what are some of the what are some of the questions? So you've identified one of them that you want to pursue. So why is this partly red and why is this partly black? What are some of the other questions that you're interested in pursuing when you go back there?
Lots.
Or what are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on this. Right now, I'm working on just getting my thesis organized. Yeah. But I am going back to Japan this summer, and I'll be going to more temples, more shrines, collecting more talismans, looking at archives, and just digging in deeper with. Yeah.
Good. And in the archives, so you were saying, so you kind of happened upon these talismans from 1920. I mean, that's kind of an amazing story. So you just ordered them
Online.
online.
Yeah.
It was like an archive was available to you online.
It was, yeah, it was like some kind of online auction. And I just was like, oh, that looks kind of cool, whatever. And it turned out to be really.
And in the archives, what are you looking for? Are you looking to see if they develop over time? Are you looking to see if they're in each period, or is there something more specific you're looking for?
Some of the things I'm looking at are, the last time I was there, I collected some newspaper articles from the Meiji period that talk about talismans. So I'm gonna see how they were thought of and talked about and used.
Okay. Oh, we have page again.
You get to be paged if you want, Scott. So I was curious about the fortunes, that if it was a good fortune, they take it with them, and if it was a bad one, they get left behind. So is the assumption that if they leave it behind in that space, that the fortune won't come to bear? Is there something about the act of taking it away with you and holding on to it that will make it come to fruition? Because I think in maybe North American culture, we would see that as, oh, if I leave it behind, it just doesn't exist. We might laugh at that idea. And so I'm wondering the cultural significance of sort of leaving it behind versus taking it with you. And then in what manner do the bad ones get destroyed?
You leave them behind for the kami to take care of it for you. So you don't carry your negative fortune away with you, and they're destroyed in ritual fire.
Is that person, sorry, the kami? Do they have special training or?
Oh, sorry,
or-
the kami are the gods.
Oh,
Sorry, I
okay,
should have
okay.
clarified.
We don't all speak Japanese.
I'm
Okay,
so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's something important to share, hey?
The number of times I've been in a room where I had no idea what they were talking about. I can't even count. I'm wondering if you could just give us a little bit of background, like how you came to this topic, like what jumped out at you as a research question, like why you thought this was significant sort of path to spend a few of your years on.
So growing up, I just always had this affinity for, East Asian things. And when I started university, the plan was law school. And then I started taking religious studies classes and really fell in love with the study of all of this. So I went to China and Japan one year, and one of my professors said, "Kate, when you come back, choose." And I chose Japan. China's great, but I chose Japan. And I don't know what it is about talismans that excite me. I just think they're really cool. So, yeah. And there's no, like the Goshuin are, like I have my work cut out for me because there's nothing on them, nobody's done this before. So I'm trying to find things to read to help me, and yeah, I'm told it's up to you. I'm like, great. So.
Thank you. It's very interesting. Though Japan is to me a totally empty field. But do you realize that when you go to one of the Chinese temples here in town, they have the same thing as the Omikuji? You have been up there because it seems to be something that came maybe parallel development or something that came from China, but it's not Buddhist because
Absolutely.
it is definitely one of the older Japanese Chinese religions.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have an online question from Alan Batten. And Alan, if you just speak, we'll see whether it's working in the room here.
I would like you to tell us a bit more about the attempts to suppress Buddhism during the Meiji period. What happened, for example, to the temples in Kyoto and Nara, many of which were Buddhist? Were they suppressed?
Yes, thanks for that. The government stripped all things Buddhist. So it was very similar to the Cultural Revolution in China. They defrocked monks and nuns. They melted down bells, statues, destroyed all things Buddhist. One of the temple complexes that I visited last summer, you can see exactly where they cleaved off the Buddhist elements, which is really interesting.
And yet these remained, or these.
Yeah.
And so,
Unchanged over time and space. So that it's really interesting to me.
yeah. And can you expand on that a little bit? Because some of us know only a little bit about the history of Japan and the Japanese culture, for example. So is that significant because these relate to deity? It's like something that survived despite the dismantling of Buddhism across Kyoto and other areas.
It survived the separation. So before the Meiji Restoration, Buddhism and Shinto overlapped. They shared complex, they shared space, and so they were really intertwined. And so when the government came in and there was this real push to be nationalistic and they wanted to promote Shinto as the state religion, so they forced these two religions apart and, condemned Buddhism as being foreign because it was politically motivated. And so for me, it's interesting that these talismans that are both Shinto and Buddhist survived and are able to tell a story about that.
No, thank you. That's very helpful. All right. Well, we'll give a last call for questions here before we get Tanya out of the hot seat. I want to thank you. Sorry, I can't stand too close to you or my microphone rings, but I want to thank you for putting together this beautiful PowerPoint and wish you luck in, doing what you're doing, which is very difficult. I can appreciate that just having heard this, right? To delve into a field where there's very little secondary literature and even less secondary literature, in a language that you're familiar with is not an easy thing to do. So thank you for sharing it with us, and you'll have to come back when you're done and tell us what you found. So perhaps everyone could join me in thanking Tanya for her presentation today.
Thank you.
And let me just, before we sign off, let me just say we have no public lecture next week because it's a reading break at the University of Victoria. So we're going to take a short pause, but we will be back on Thursday, March 2nd with another one of our fabulous graduate students, Jessica Zai Can Cook, who will be talking about sacramentalism and modern art in the 1920s. So we look forward to seeing many of you at that time. And until then, have a good evening. Thanks very much.